So I think we should start. There's 44 people on the call. I don't see it ticking up anymore right now. Kristen, if you see people that you're letting them in, correct?
Yes.
So Jim, I'm just going to start by just doing quick introductions and just giving an overview of the call, and then I'll hand it over to you. And then Jason Lawrence, our digital strategist, will go through the results of the survey. Excuse me. So I'm MJ Lawrence. I work here at Roost. We have a lot of our team members on this evening. Thank you, Team Roost, for joining. We also have many of our Ironman Task Force members on the call. So I'm just going to quick go through so everybody know who is on the task force, and then I'll hand it over to Jim. Before I do that, I just would like to mention that this was a huge lift. There was a tremendous amount of data that we received from this survey, and our data analyst, Jay Bennett, who unfortunately couldn't be on the call tonight, spent a tremendous amount of time with the support of Jason Lawrence and a couple of other of our staff members. So we took this very, very seriously, and we did our due diligence. And as you'll see through this survey results tonight, there's a lot of information here that we will share after the meeting. So on the task force, we have Ann O'Leary from Lake Placid. We have Trish Friedlander as well from Lake Placid. Brian Magnus, Lake Placid, Tara Wright, and Doreen Peregrine. They're all from Lake Placid. We have Julie Woody from Keene. We have Sherry Cross and Sue Young, as well as Jay Ward from Jay. David Nyes from Keene. Charlie Terry is from Wilmington. We have Greg Borzilleri as well as Dave Christensen from Ironman. Dick Cummings is representing the town of Lake Placid. Peter Holderried is, the town of North Elba, Peter Holderried is representing the village of Lake Placid. And we have Michelle Preston, who is the Whiteface, the Wilmington Chamber of Commerce. And we also have Roy Holzer, who is the Wilmington Town Supervisor. And Jim McKenna and myself also sit on this committee with Bethany Valenzi, who is our events coordinator and also is the volunteer coordinator for Ironman. So that's our committee. And from there, I'm going to hand it over to you, James McKenna, brief, and then we'll move on to
brief.
Brief.
Thank you, Mary Jane Lawrence. And thank everybody for joining us tonight, and thank the task force. You know, what this survey is, it's not meant to be yay or nay. It's meant to be gathering information. So as the task force continues the process of really trying to come to a conclusion with a recommendation on which direction to go, I think it has provided us with a lot of information that we're very happy to share with everybody. And as Mary Jane said, all this information will be available, and even up to there was over 6,000 written comments that our staff diligently went through every single one. But all that information is going to be available to everybody. And with that, I think we should just start rolling through it, Mary Jane.
So yeah, so what we're going to do is as we go through the slides, if you have questions, you can put them in the chat, and we'll pause every once in a while to answer any questions in the chat. It's just too many people to have people talking, live. So you can either, say I have a question, or put your question in the chat. We'll monitor the chat. We'll pause every once in a while to answer the questions. So Jason Lawrence, who is again our Director of Digital Strategy, is here tonight. He's done a lot of work on this survey, and you're up.
Thanks. Good evening, everybody. I'm going to go ahead and share my screen here. And can everyone see the presentation?
Yes.
I can, there we go, drag the window out of the way. There we go. Okay. All right, so I want to spend just a minute on the methodology. There's an overwhelming response, which is fantastic. We expected, or we're hoping for, around 400 total responses. That would give us our margin of error around 5%, which would be acceptable, but we received almost 1,600 responses, which is absolutely fantastic. We sent this out through a press release and sort of a public link that anyone could share. We also sent an email invitation to all the emails that we have in the Roost database. And we also, to make sure that we really got locals, did a Facebook ad that was targeted at just the race towns in particular, Osable, Keene, J, Upper J, Lake Placid, and Wilmington, to make sure that we got as much local feedback as possible. That ad ran for about 11 days and reached about 3,800, almost 3,800 folks from around the area. So we're really happy with the response rate. If you look at 2018 census data, that would put the response error rate around 4%. And if anything, that's kind of conservative. Looking at 2018 census data for Essex County would include, like, all the children in the county as well, which we wouldn't expect most 3-year-olds to take the survey. So we're erring on the side of the caution with that, but we're really happy with the overall response rate. Out of the total number of responses, we did remove 66 results completely from the data. Those responses were more than likely duplicates. There was, out of those 66, actually 31 of them came from one particular IP address in Colorado. Clearly somebody just trying to skew the results. They started with Lake Placid, Florida as their postal code and then switched to Lake Placid, New York. So they were clearly not valid submissions. So those were removed completely. Whenever else there was a duplicate submission, which did happen on occasion, like I said, there was 66 in total, 31 of which were that one individual. We always kept the first response that they submitted. And we used a variety of things, IP address, geolocation, the actual content of the post, things like that, how far apart the submissions were to kind of determine what may or may not be a duplicate. So you can see the segments broken down here. And as we worked through with the task force and the community and got feedback on kind of what you'd like to see in the results to understand community sentiment and how people felt about the race, the segments are broken down into the different race towns, as we call them, Keene, J, Upper J, Lake Placid, and Wilmington. And they're broken down into people whose residence is directly on the course and folks whose residence is not on the course, but they still reside in one of those race towns. And then the third segment is regional residents. So those would be folks in Saranac Lake or, maybe Bloomingdale or somewhere nearby for the most part. But a regional resident could be anyone with an Adirondack postal code. And we'll show you the breakdown in just a minute on how that worked out. There were 157 responses that were postal codes that were not within the Adirondacks at all. And we kept them in the data set, but it's not statistically relevant to kind of understand an outside view of the race. And so we did not include those results in this presentation itself. But if you'd like to ever see the raw data, those responses are still in there. Any questions about that? No? All right. So the town breakdown looks like this in terms of who responded and the different segments. So we can see that there was 449 total respondents, and you can see the town breakout there. I won't read them all to you. For folks who reside, their residence is directly on the course, and 730 who live in a race town, but their residence is not directly on a course. And you can see sort of the town breakdown of regional residents. And really was centered around regional residents who are really close to Lake Placid and those surrounding communities. So that was good to see. At the very bottom, you'll see 14 other Adirondack zip codes. Those all just had one response per postal code. So there wasn't really a sense in listing them all. So the very first question we asked was your overall level of support, and you could answer I strongly oppose, I somewhat oppose, I'm neutral, I somewhat favor, I strongly favor. And the breakout looks like this. So out of all respondents, basically the communities as a whole were slightly more in favor of the race than against. The more likely, or the closer you are to the course or a race town, the less supportive of the race you were by a bit. You can see that if you lived on the course, you're much less supportive than if you did not live on the course. And regional residents were a bit more supportive than those who lived on the course, and a little more supportive than all respondents lumped together. Keep going. I can't see the
Anybody
chat,
have
by
any
the way.
questions so far? We don't want to rush through this, but we'll just keep going unless somebody has a question. There's no question that's not a good question, by the way.
Yeah, and I cannot see the chat, so please do interrupt me if there's something there.
I
Okay.
will.
All right.
Not to worry.
The other thing that came up was, okay, so business owners must love this thing, and everyone who's not a business owner doesn't like the race, obviously. That was something we heard repeatedly. And so we wanted to ask specifically, like, hey, if you're a business owner, do you like the race or do you not like the race? Do you sway one way or the other more? And it actually ended up almost dead even. If you're a business owner or not a business owner, there really isn't a difference between the two groups. The support is split about the same either way. And something else to note, I did get a question about, did only business owners take the survey? And you can see from this is the split here. Much more, about 3 times as many non-business owners took the survey as business owners in these communities, which is, a good split to see. And so you can see that split here as well. So mostly non-business owners took the survey when we look at those all respondent totals. But basically no difference if you're a business owner or not a business owner, you have about the same level of support in both groups. So this is where we started to see a little divergence. And this is similar to what we saw earlier. Businesses, if my business is directly on the course or my business is not on the course, what's my level of support look like? And my support does drop a little bit if my business is located directly on the course versus not on the course. All right, I'm just going to pause in case you need to interrupt me, but I'll keep going. So the next thing was to look at your level of involvement with Ironman and sort of how supportive of the race you might be. And by far, the most supportive people of the event, go figure, were the folks who actually participated, competed in an Ironman event. And then you can see that folks who volunteered or spectated were also pretty supportive, a little more than half. But as you can see, folks who had no interaction with the race at all are the least supportive group by far. And that makes a little bit of sense. So in terms of community engagement, you can see that getting the community involved would lead to more support. But you can see clearly that those who have really not ever had anything to do with Ironman are not a big supporters of the race. Okay. So one of the other things that we did was, if you took the survey, you may recall, the second question was essentially a free form question. We just opened with a box. You could type whatever you wanted. And it said, what do you dislike about Ironman, basically? And we read all of those responses. There's 1,332 in this field, and there's several other more free form open-ended fields that are included in this as well. And we read them all and put them into groups based on intent. And what's interesting is this was before you took any multiple choice, any of the survey respondents took any multiple choice questions yet. So we haven't influenced their decision. We just said, hey, off the top of your head, write in this box what you don't like about the Ironman race. And when we put those in some buckets, and there's some sample quotes here of the sorts of things that folks wrote, you can see that basically, athletes training and not in the idea of overcrowding being the two main topics in the freeform responses, but also travel delays and this idea of athletes being rude or disrespectful, which is kind of up there with the first one, but they were definitely different things. One was specifically more about cycling, and one was just rude and disrespectful in general, which is why they're in two different buckets. So you can see that breakout here.
So Jason, just to be clear, so we had 4 staff members that went through, you were one of them, and we put them, they're over, did you say 6,000 comments? And we put them into the buckets that had similar themes, just so people kind of understand how these open-ended comments were put into different categories with the similar themes.
Correct. Each one was read and entered into a bucket. And in the there'll be a PDF published online directly after this meeting, and that PDF has every single open-ended response in it and the buckets that they were added to, so you can review those if you'd like. And it is actually really enlightening to read some of the individual responses, but it's more helpful to see them as an aggregate, obviously. Okay. So then folks were asked multiple choice what they thought were the top detriments to the community for the race, and you could choose up to 3 of these, which is why you don't see these add up to an even 100%. When we look at all respondents together, oh, and I should just explain the 3 colors here. The idea here is the question the task force asked was, okay, well, is it only people who oppose the race think this, or is it people in favor of the race only think this? So here you can see that breakout of folks who oppose or neutral or favor and how they stack in their response rate for these individual items. And you can see things like event organizers don't respect my local community and its members. Folks who oppose the race are much more likely to think that than folks who are for the race. So there's just an example of where they diverge a little bit. Most of the time, they did follow similar patterns. So a couple things that just point out here, I'm not going to read all these, obviously, is again, the #1 complaint on the multiple choice was athletes who train here don't respect the rules of the road or impact my commute. The next 2, you can almost kind of group together in some ways. Travel delays on day of the race and overcrowding in and around town. These are basically regarding, sort of race impact, total number of racers, athletes, that kind of idea. So you can kind of lump those together in some ways, but it's good to see them apart, especially when you think about Lake Placid and maybe some of the surrounding communities who may not be as overcrowded in terms of foot traffic and that sort of thing.
So Jason, I think we got to pause for a second because this did come up in a conversation and you had an explanation for it. So there's a question in the chat. If you delete duplicate IP addresses, that means, for example, if a husband and wife are in the same household, one could only fill it out or one would be deleted. And if, multiple people were filling it out at Starbucks or the library. So how do you differentiate that? Donnie and I both took it in our house, 2 different computers, but in our house. And, what if someone took it on the same computer? How does that work?
Yep. So your responses would have to be basically identical in order for them to get flagged as duplicate, which because of the freeform responses, that was pretty rare. And we feel pretty good about that. So I mentioned only 66 responses out of the 16, or 1,441 that ended up in the survey were completely removed from the data set. And again, we'll publish if you'd like to see the raw data, we'll include those deleted responses in the raw data as well, if you'd ever like to see those. But that's a very small percentage, obviously a couple percent margin of error if we were to assume that every one of those was not a duplicate, which obviously that's probably not the case. Most of the time using content matching, there were some really obvious ones. A good example of one that might appear to be duplicate based on IP is there's a bunch of folks who work at BOCES that filled out the survey. They were very clearly different responses, and obviously we were able to trace that IP address to that facility. And so we were like, oh, okay, clearly these are people at work filling out the survey, and they're all very different responses. When you see the exact same responses back to back, 9 minutes apart, that kind of content analysis, you can normally flag those as duplicate entries. And again, a very small percentage were removed.
So 66 were completely removed.
Correct.
And then the ones that were outside of the region, like not even anywhere,
Yeah, and that was another one. Sometimes when there was duplicates and the IP address was also out of area, those are all factors. So it's not quite as simple as just the IPs matched, so we deleted them. That's definitely not the way that it works.
So of those 66, 31 was one IP address, you said?
That's correct.
So
Yeah.
there was really only, other than that one, there was roughly 34 or 35 maybe that you deleted. And it was an automatic deletion if it's 2 people from a same IP address. You looked at the surveys to see differences.
Correct. We ran GeoIPs and a bunch of other tests to see if they were in fact duplicates. And there's definitely a margin of error in there. And again, like I said, even if you assume that all of them were not duplicates, it's very unlikely, which is very unlikely. They wouldn't affect the numbers in any major way because you're only talking about 35 responses.
Is there any comments? Dee Dee, if you want to unmute yourself and speak, feel free to. that's the answer to your question in the chat. All right, let's,
Keep on going.
was there any discussion about how much money Roos has to pay to bring Iron Man to the area? In the survey? No. In the task force? Yes.
Okay, you want to keep going?
Yes.
Okay. So we're going to continue with the top detriments by segment. And so this was all respondents, and then we're going to jump to just folks who reside directly on the course. And you can see there's a few small differences here, but you're going to see that there isn't a huge differences in most of these. I'm just going to point out a couple of the differences. You'll see the athletes training that goes up a little bit, and you basically see that overall opposition just ticks up a little bit, which fits with earlier data that we saw on the slides that showed that basically if you live directly on the course, you were less supportive of the race. And so that just follows as we go through here. You also see the other big change here is athletes and spectators have been disrespectful of my personal property, which makes a lot of sense because they live directly on the race course. So they're obviously the most likely to experience a negative impact from, like, you know, somebody throwing litter on their lawn or something like that. The other question that came up talking with the task force was essentially, is there a large difference between Lake Placid and then the surrounding communities who maybe don't have, you know, all the transition areas, and really we're talking about the bike course specifically. Is there a big difference between those? And the quick version is no, and that's essentially what these graphs are showing is when we compare the other communities that the course goes through, there isn't much of a difference in what people did or didn't like about the race or any particular impacts. So you'll see that these numbers are basically the same.
So we're getting questions about, like, how much money does the Village and Down pay to have Ironman come to Lake Placid? Do we want to answer those? Do we want to go through the survey? Because I think let's just get through the data, and then Mary and Barry and whomever else, we can have as long of a conversation as we want about the budget. But let's just get through this data, because when we break and go completely off subject, it's hard to follow the process, if that's okay.
Yes,
Okay, let's go ahead.
Okay. So I guess we'll, if you have a question about the slides that we're looking at, do feel free to ask those, and then it will dive a little deeper at the end of the data. Okay, into some of those other questions. In terms of folks not on the course but do reside in a race town, again, no big surprises here. You will see a few changes around environmental impact on the lake. That goes up quite a bit, which is interesting. But other than that, there's not any major differences. And you're going to see the same thing again. This is just a town breakout again. There really isn't a whole lot to report here, except that, again, there's not a huge difference between you know, Lake Placid and J, Keene, Upper J. You know, environmental impact on the lake, you can see drops a little bit for J, Keene, Upper J, Wilmington, because they don't have a lake in their community that's directly impacted, so that kind of makes sense. But there's really nothing in here that's out of the ordinary compared to the other, you know, everybody together. And when we jump forward to regional residents, you can see that opposition drops a little bit, and the travel delays takes a jump. And this makes a lot of sense. If you're you know, reading through the freeform comments, we did see some themes around, like, you know, I live in Saranac Lake and it's really hard for me to get to work in Lake Placid, and, you know, some things like that. So that makes sense that regional residents would comment on those items. So the next freeform question we asked, and again, this was at the beginning of the survey, we asked what you like freeform, and then we asked what you didn't like freeform, was what do you like about the race? 23% folks felt like it had an overall positive economic impact for the region. A lot of folks felt that, you know, it was fun, inspirational atmosphere, and then, of course, being around a high value competitive environment. And 7% mentioned that, you know, it increases and helps attract future travelers to the area as well. And again, these were those freeform questions that were put into buckets. And you can see some examples there. Good to go. All right. All right. So then we, of course, asked same thing, multiple choice. You can choose up to 3 of these. when you were responding. What were the top benefits of the race? Positive economic impact for the region was by far the best response. And then the next two are semi-related, but they are two different things. The area's exposure as an international sports destination, and the event helps introduce new people to the area. So this idea of it helps expose the region to other travelers is definitely a theme, as a really positive, result of the race. There is some really interesting things in the other, if you ever want to read those free-form comments, some of those are pretty interesting in terms of the positive benefits as well. And as we go through the segments, I'll just point out some of the differences here. So if you live on the course, this you can see just dropped a little bit because folks didn't have to answer any of these, and you're more likely to oppose the race if you live directly on the course. And so you can see that as I just jump back and forth, you can see basically the percentage curve kind of stays the same, but basically all of the things kind of take a dip, which makes sense. And you can see that split still pretty darn consistent across the Lake Placid versus the other race communities. It's going to keep going unless there's, yeah, all right. And then of course we start to see some changes as we get into race towns, but you don't live directly on the course. And one of those being that families coming back on vacation is a little bit higher. But other than that, you'll kind of see that trend continue, and you'll see a few more people, interestingly enough, who are opposed to the race, but still felt that it had a positive economic impact or other things like that for folks who live in those race towns that don't live directly on the course. So that's sort of another interesting trend, that there was some more folks who said they were opposed to the race, but still felt that there was some benefit when they didn't live directly on the course. And again, that breakout, there's not really anything different here I want to point out. And again, if I'm going too fast, somebody stop me, and/or we will publish this. So, okay.
I think so far so good. We have questions, but it's not pertaining to the data.
Okay.
There's a question, Dee Dee has another question about, the IP addresses and the validity of the people that filled out the survey, but let's just pause till we get through this data and then we can go through all those questions.
Okay, perfect. So as we get to regional residents, these are folks who don't live in a race town, we can see that support takes a pretty significant jump. And the one thing I really want to point out here is spectators dine and shop takes a pretty significant leap, more than double almost, I think, from the previous data. So basically regional towns are sort of reporting that they're seeing that benefit of spectators being in their communities at a higher level. Okay. I lose my, there we go. So if you said that training was a detriment, you could, or I'm sorry, we also asked if, when training leading up to the race, like, what did you think about the training? Was it good or was it bad? Just tell us in general. You could freeform write whatever you wanted in here. And we, again, put those into buckets, and you can see some interesting, examples here as well. There was a couple of interesting trends in here. One was not surprising in that, again, this idea of training beforehand, not respecting the rules of the road, was a very common theme. About a quarter of folks said that. Something that we didn't expect actually was folks to say positive things about the training experience, which was interesting. So about 22% of folks actually said something good. I should point out too that there were folks, it was possible to end up in both of these buckets if your comment said something like, I really don't like how riders are so close together on the road. It's scary for me when I drive to work. But I really think that they're good for my local business, or something like that. So sometimes folks were on the fence and went two ways in their comments, and so you could have ended up in more than one bucket depending on your comment. And something else that was interesting was, and we put it in a separate bucket, was it wasn't just this idea that athletes don't respect the rules of the road, but we really felt it was different and should be in its own category, and that was training creates a dangerous environment. There was definitely a theme around people just saying, like, I didn't feel safe passing cyclists. It's too close together, it's dangerous. Like, so that was definitely a theme that we wanted to highlight as well. Okay. So when asked, this was a multiple choice question. It was, what would you support? And you could choose as many as you wanted for this particular response. And 31% of folks said that they favored canceling the race permanently. And go figure, when you look at the oppose versus favor, basically folks who oppose the race were in favor of canceling the race. That makes a lot of sense. The next two major themes were around, again, race size and race impact, establishing maximum competitors and altering the route to minimize congestion. And what's interesting here is, I think the task force was interested in, well, the only people who oppose the race want to see those changes, or is it kind of more even, or to just people who favor? And really, it's pretty even. So basically, folks who favor the race are open to, these sorts of changes, and would like to see some of these things as well. And then, of course, you can see the rest, keep everything the way it is. Obviously, most folks who favor the race felt that way. And there's another, which is the open-ended responses, you can read as well. Okay. And so as we get into the individual segments, again, if you live on the course, you are more likely to oppose the race. You're also more likely to want to cancel the race. So that's sort of the big change there. There really isn't anything else to specify. I don't think there's anything else that was major differences, just that takes a nice little jump there. And again, not much of a difference in the split between the towns in terms of those proportions. The only big difference between the towns, I would say, is the altering the route to minimize congestion. Again, in that match sort of regional communities, you're more likely to want to minimize that bike route congestion if you if you live outside of Lake Placid and probably have to drive somewhere. That was definitely a theme as well. And so you can see race towns, but you don't live right on the course. We just drop a little bit in opposition, but basically the numbers are following in line. It's the same sort of curve there. Same sort of thing with the town split. Not much of a change there in terms of them being really different with each other proportionately. And when we drop to regional residents, you can see again that canceling the race drops. And now the big change here is altering the route to minimize congestion takes a very large jump, which makes sense. Again, those were the folks who, when you read open-ended responses, were clearly saying things like, I have to drive to work and it's a pain in the butt. I want to go to church and I can't. And so those are definitely things that we saw. So that also makes sense. All right, so just as a summary here.
I'm sorry, it might be a good to, before you go to the summary, is Karen Armstrong, the slide that shows, if you're a competitor, you're X amount more in favor of the race. So Karen, this is the one that you're asking for. So if you competed in the race, you're 83% or whatever.
92, yeah.
92%.
Yeah, if you're an athlete, you're much more likely to support the race, which makes sense. If you've
volunteered or been a spectator, but clearly if you've had nothing to do with the race, it is, which you can see, it's just a complete thorn in your side. It's just, I have nothing to do with it, but it's a complete and utter inconvenience, and then other issues surrounding it, which again makes sense. So if you want to go to the summary, then we can address some of the other questions in the chat.
A little too far, there we go. So if we were just looking at some of the key things we want to pull out that are probably the big highlights. So communities as a whole, and we lump all the race communities together, 49% are in favor of Ironman and about 41% opposed. And that's that strongly opposed, strongly, or somewhat opposed, strongly favor, somewhat favor. Those two groups grouped together, neutral taken out. Locals living on the course are less supportive of the event than locals who do not live on the course. And locals who do not live on the course and regional residents have really similar views. So the thing there is basically if you reside directly on the course, you definitely have a divergent view than folks who don't live directly on the course, but all the rest of the folks seem to have a pretty similar view. If you volunteered, spectated, or participated, you're about 5 times more likely to support the race than if you didn't have any interaction at all. Something that did surprise us, honestly, too, business owners basically had the same view of Ironman as those folks who don't own businesses. The community's basically even on that, business owners versus non-business owners. The number one complaint amongst all respondents was athlete training leading up to the weeks of the event, in the weeks leading up to the event. The number one positive things, respondents felt that economic impact was the number one, followed by areas exposure as an international sports destination being the number 2. And if we look at overall, 31% of respondents felt the race should just be canceled completely. And in terms of changes, the most popular changes, of course, after canceling the race were centered around basically limiting the total number of competitors or altering the route to minimize that congestion. And one of the other big questions, of course, was, does Lake Placid residents' view of the race really differ from other course towns or folks who live on the course? And the answer is no. Basically, Lake Placid residents and other community residents feel pretty much the same about the race across the board.
Thank you, Jason.
No problem.
So back to the question about the IP addresses. There, Dee Dee had another question in regard to, so what if somebody from Ironman that doesn't live in Lake Placid, but said they did put in the 12946 area code, lied about where they live? How would you?
So yeah, your address was self-reported. So that was a thing, but we also used GeoIP address locating to try and determine your location. And if your location was outside of the area, that was one of the variables to determine if you did or did not fit inside the local respondent window there. Was I clear there, or was that too murky?
So I think that you just have to explain the second part a little in layman terms, a little bit, the geolocator. So it's software that you put the.
Yeah, we could basically look at your IP address and determine what city you live in. And so we use that as a tool to help determine if you did in fact live in the area. Yep.
It's a little creepy, huh?
Yep. Well, like I said, we were able to literally be like, oh, all these people work at BOCES. Yeah. Right. Yeah.
Okay, so Dee Dee, if you think of anything else, you can put it in the chat. We're going to keep moving. Okay, so Barry wants to know about the discussion about how much Roost has to pay to bring Ironman to the area. So we're talking moving forward for the contract for 22, because that's the only thing we have right now. So Jim, I'm going to let you take that.
Well, we have budgeted 90,000 for it. This past year, it was 100,000. And that's pretty consistent with, since the start of the race, it's actually increased about 5,000 a year, starting many years ago.
And so also there's some additional expenses. So we have Bethany, who does a lot of other things at Roost, but we did take a quarter of her salary and put that into the budget as an expense. And we also pay for the Ironman staff to be, for their accommodations. And I think that was, I don't have the budget up, but I think it was about 14,000. It's going to be more in 2022 because the room rates are just so high since COVID. And Mary Schubert, how much money does the village and the town pay to have Ironman come to Lake Placid? James?
Well, they don't really have any direct payments to Ironman for that. The agreement is on the payment is with Roost. In talking to the town and village, and I think on the budget, Mary Jane, correct me if I'm wrong, we've identified about 7,000 in expenses based on overtime.
Yes, so they don't break out the Ironman specifically. They have an overtime, budget item, but it doesn't. And from what we can from speaking to the other towns and villages, nobody breaks out specific hours of overtime directly related to Ironman. There is a conversation with the with the task force moving forward to try and get a better handle on that labor.
If I'm going to try to pull up that budget, but I think the total
I
expense,
have it. Hold on one second.
I think it was 122 total expenses we identified.
No guessing, Jimmy.
I know.
Yeah, but there are some missing pieces. So right now, 122,800, which includes the contract, the staff lodging, which was 13,000, the village overtime, 7,000, a percentage of Bethany's salary, the Wilmington Fire Department. What we don't have is, ORDA loss of revenue, the cost of the conference center, the lost revenue for the municipal parking lot. Those are some pieces that we don't have that we are gathering. So obviously it's a rough draft. Let's see. Is Essex County bed tax funding that pay for Ironman?
The answer is yes.
Mhm.
They also get the sales tax too.
Oh, there was another question from Dee Dee about, sorry, MJ, if I'm jumping around, did you remove all IP addresses not in the area? And the answer to that is no, because we also looked at service providers. As a good example, where I live, I'm only able to get HughesNet, and GeoIP for that often puts me in Houston, Texas or Philadelphia. And so we also looked at service providers, and where satellite service providers were the case, we did not remove those based on GeoIP because we're probably eliminating rural residents who only have that as an internet option.
Okay, thank you. So Barry is asking, considering how much Ironman is collecting in fees, is the area getting a return on our investment? Seems like a money grab from Ironman. So Jim,
No, well, there's a couple of things, and do you have that budget in front of you, Mary Jane? They have some, Ironman has their own budget for the event over and above anything that we deal with. From that budget, Mary Jane, the direct spending they have for expenses locally do you have that right in front of you still?
yeah, and we can, Dave Kristen, who is on this call, is representing Ironman, but the operations, the expense for Ironman just in local staff and contract agreement, in food that they buy locally, in the dine around and venue fees. It's
Porta
about
potties, all that.
Yeah.
Everything they purchase locally.
478,000. But again, Dave, not to put you on the spot, but if you'd like to speak to it, you're welcome to.
Yeah, it's a fair question, and it's one we get in a lot of our communities. So your sales tax that the county gets alone from the economic impact of north of $10 million on the weekend significantly eclipses what the investment is from Roost and from other parties. That's just the sales tax. The important thing to recognize is that the economic impact, sorry, I've got a little one with me here. Beyond that is additional. So the answer to your question of return on investment, it's probably the best investment that a municipality can make. There's a lot of things that we spend money on as a community, any community, my community that I live in upstate New York. We spend money on things that we don't get a return on investment on. This is absolutely a return on your investment plus many multipliers.
So, Dee Dee, you were asking, additional expenses like, garbage, and, we have some of that, no, we don't pay to clean up and Dave, again, you're welcome to speak to this, that the town and the village do not pay for the cleanup. They don't pay for the dump fees. We don't pay for the porta potties. We don't pay for security. We don't, so there are a lot of those things, again, that we know that we don't pay for. Dee Dee, specifically, the labor in regards to the hospital overtime, et cetera. No, we don't have that.
Yeah, the objective of any organization, DMO, like Roost is, a DMO is a representative, it's an acronym for a destination marketing organization. Their job, and MJ and Jim's job, they do a great job, by the way, and let me tell you that because I work across the country and I get to work with lots of groups. Their job is to try to attract this type of business to your economy, and they have a budget, that bed tax, that Essex County bed tax. That's what you've equipped this team to be able to manage, and their job is to then look at the best way to invest that money. When we do this in other communities, we spend a significant amount of operational dollars to make sure that we are covering our end of the bargain. So the city will maintain certain things that the city and town and region need to maintain, their parks and their streets, and but it's not a gouging that is happening. We're paying our own way, and we're partners with Roost to make sure that we can get it done the appropriate way in your area.
If we keep moving, Jim Smith, or whom, if it's Jim Smith, said that the North Elba contract with Roost was originally put in place to pay for the event host fee. If so, the North Elba taxpayers are paying for it. I'm not following you, Jim. Our budget is built on the occupancy tax, which is collected through lodging properties and private rentals from the traveler. So that's how our budget is built. So I'm not sure how you're getting to the North Elba taxpayers, but if you want to unmute yourself.
We've had a contract with North Elba long before Ironman. There has been a contract in place that declines each year, but we still have a contract with North Elba, not related to Ironman.
And then Evan is saying that was the sales tax comparison for this weekend compared to La Crosse or Horse Show or July 4th week?
It's similar at peak capacity. It's certainly similar.
Are any of these options viable for Ironman programming? In other words, were the questions in the survey designed around a flexibility of some sort in Ironman events?
We did. There was I was say, MJ, there was a slide in the survey, asking about course changes, and that was about moving the race specifically, and then of course altering the route and number of competitors. So if that's what you mean, then yes, we did that, and folks were most in support of altering the route or minimizing congestion, and then second in line, you would say moving the race to like a less congested time was the secondary thing. I'm assuming that's what they meant there.
Jay, if I can, Jim, if you'd mind, I'd love to speak to that. I think this is one of the areas of opportunity that Ironman has to improve upon, and to be completely transparent to the public community that's here on this call. Your task force has done a really good job of asking of me and my team what can actually be done. I would be remiss to not mention that I think there's been a little bit of complacency on everybody's part on how the event has operated over the last few years, and that rests on my shoulders as much as it rests on everybody else's shoulders. So we, as an event organizer, have an obligation to consume this survey data and try to modify our event, whether that be course, whether that be schedule, whether that be, pick a version of that story. We need to find areas of improvement to bring to the table, to bring to your task force, and ways in which we can get better and support you all better. It's safe to say for the last 5 or 6 years, our team was focused on producing the race and might not necessarily have been focused on the long-term viability, and that's an area we can get better. So that's on us.
So a couple things. When you say the best investment we can make, and I agree with Dee Dee, it's not just about the money, right? It's about the best investment that we can make in the community. And yes, we certainly do want to make as many people in the community happy. And, I was saying to Jim the other day, you know, we hear a lot, well, it's all about the businesses and it's not about the community members. And, you know, as best we try to navigate our way through this and understanding that you're right, this is a struggle on some levels with the training and the bikes and the inconvenience of the road closures and all the other things that come along that are not conducive to the community. And we continue to go back to the, you know, number one, you know, two things have happened. Number one, we had the pandemic, right? So it was the perfect storm. We didn't have events. The weather was beautiful. People were flooding in here. They couldn't get on planes. They could drive. They wanted to be in open spaces. Is that the best time to decide to do away with what is an economic engine, whether we like it or not, to this community? And that infusion of money helps us do a lot of things on a municipality level as well as on a community level. And so, yes, our community is absolutely the most important thing. And our lakes are absolutely the most important thing. And can we find that balance? Yes, we can. It doesn't have to be all or nothing. It doesn't have to be a huge blowout race or no race at all. And so that's what we're trying to navigate through. And, you know, Evan, you said, well, we don't have to pay for 4th of July and we don't have to pay for lacrosse. And so, you know, why, if they're so similar, why are we paying for Ironman? And I will say that, one, we do pay for 4th of July and we do pay for lacrosse, to be clear. And then, Jim, if you want to speak to the Ironman reach in the marketing and the significance of that, please feel free to.
Well, you know, I can certainly mention that, and maybe Dave can comment on it too, but you know, the Ironman Foundation and the Give Back, we're compiling all those numbers going back to 1999, and it well exceeds our financial commitment on an annual basis over that time period. It's definitely over 7 figures, and there's a lot of different gives that we don't. Last year there was no race. In 2020 they came forward with 20,000 for local community groups. Number of times, you know, Adirondack Health. I mean, a number of our community services have received direct funding through their Ironman Foundation, and it's well over 7 figures. That's one thing. The other thing is the marketing reach you mentioned, Mary Jane, and we talked about that earlier today. The live streaming, certainly, you know, I forget the numbers, Dave, you might know, but I do recall 1.6 million watching the race 2 years ago. I don't know this year's number. The fact there is value for us with that association, with that brand on an international basis. Ironman does a website, Ironman does social media. That all has a positive effect. You know, it's evaluating that effect. How do we want to go? And that's what we're trying to figure out with our destination planning is, you know, how far do we want to reach? How far do we want to go? But there's significant value from a marketing point of view. And clearly the Ironman Foundation givebacks totals well over what our financial commitment has been over the 22 years.
Yeah, I think you did perfect there, Jim, in my opinion, describing. There's a lot of, I think the only thing that I would add is your community is a premier destination, not just for triathlon. It is a premier destination because you guys are Lake Placid. You're the region. You're and you're not just Lake Placid. You're Keene. You're Jay. You're Whiteface. You're a lot of things. Our constituents are. It's one of the most highly demanded races we have in the world, and that's because you guys are amazing hosts and because it's an amazing region, and it's just a wonderful place to go to. So not only is it good from a marketing perspective, so you get seen a lot, you just have a lot of, you know, repeat. I'm certain, and there may be even people on this call that have relocated to Lake Placid or started businesses in Lake Placid because of this race. This race brought them there for the first time. We call them racecations for a reason, and this is one of the most highly sought after locations on the planet for us to race. And we as an organization need to, again, consume this information and try to get better.
So one of the other questions that, Jim, we spoke about this morning is like comparing it to another summer weekend. So, you know, what we talked about was the Ironman stay is longer than the traditional leisure traveler. So when you crunch those numbers, and I hate to do this without being able to show it on a spreadsheet, but we are going to have it on a spreadsheet, which we will share with everybody when it's, when we have it. But Jim, you did do some numbers in the direct.
Well, what we did, we just took a look at our average length of stay for normal visitors and compared it to the average length of stay of Ironman. And it is larger, and there's incremental increase on midweek primarily. But what we didn't take into account or haven't mentioned, even though training is a hot button for sure, it's, those expenditures that happen, once the snow's off the ground through up until about a month before the race, and even in the fall, the slower times of the year is where we do feel some economic gain in the training.
So, again, we continue to go back to, the request for a more detailed budget, and we do have some and we don't have some numbers. So as we put that together, we will certainly share that. But again, the question is, can we get a better understanding of the economic impact?
Right. MJ, can you hear me?
Yes.
Oh, sorry. It's Sarah Kane. I just
Hi,
wanted to
Sarah.
go back. Mary's comment. I think a lot of us just wonder how much of our tax dollars are going toward funding Ironman. And I don't know if there's an easy answer to that. I don't think there is, but I think that's what a lot of people are thinking.
Well, the tax dollars that go towards it are from occupancy tax by visitors. There's really no direct funding from the county general fund or the town or village.
Okay, thank you for clarifying.
And Jim Smith, again, what is the economic impact? We know that it's significant. We can drill down with numbers and their estimates. Won't be an accurate number, but we can certainly put that together, which Jim, I know that you started doing today, or whenever you started doing it, but you brought it to the table today. There is an emotional and mental impact on those that, are experiencing event fatigue. And that's a real thing. And it's not just in Lake Placid, in our region. There's event and tourism fatigue all around the globe. I mean, people are moving around more than they ever have. And people are, events are becoming, like you say, racecations. People they don't just come and do the race and leave, which is good for us because we want them to come and spend money, et cetera. But it is an impact on the communities. And we are a tourism destination. And that is one thing that we need to work to figure out, is that balance between too much tourism and not enough tourism,
And how do we diversify that economy? That's what we've been trying to work on.
So Mary's saying, don't the housing facilities and impose minimum night stays? So that would make the average stays longer. Yes, yep, they do make the average stays longer for Ironman. That is true. And because they can, right? If they tried to make them longer for the leisure traveler would go elsewhere. Essex County tax dollars pay it, which gets given to Roost through the contract. Annually renewed by Essex County Board of Supervisor, a majority of percentage that goes to Roost. Essex County tax dollars pay.
Occupancy tax dollars,
Occupancy tax.
not general fund tax dollars.
And then we talked about, is Wendy on the call? Wendy, that's on our task force. Is she on here? If you are, Wendy, will you unmute yourself? I don't know if I saw her. But there's the question in regards to the impact on Mirror Lake. And we do have, Wendy is, she has her doctorate in environmental science. And we did have a long conversation about the environmental impact on Mirror Lake. And, you know, the truth of the matter is it would be very hard to determine the impact of one day when there's so much recreation going on Mirror Lake throughout the whole summer. In addition, there's the invasive species, there's the salt issues that we're experiencing. So, you know, not to mention the fireworks and, you know, there's plenty of other impacts on Mirror Lake. And so the conversation was it'd be very hard to determine what that impact would be. Dave, what did you send an environmental impact study? Does there any information there that would be helpful?
Yeah, we have a lot of best practices that we use in terms of specifically upstream, like how we manage some of our supplies coming into your economies. So we've done some studies most recently in Boulder, Colorado, which is another very hypersensitive environmental community that's very aware of these types of impacts. We were awarded the highest level of certification from the Council for Responsible Sport in the efforts that we make in that regard. And those are in many cases system-wide efforts that we make. So that's not lost on us. I think it's a great point. It's one that we can always strive to get better on. I think the question is rooted in, you know, what happens to a body of water when that many human beings gets into it. Which is a fair question. The level of contamination that any body of water gets throughout the rest of your year it's not human beings getting into your water is not the problem. It's typically some other contaminant that gets into your water from whether that be manufacturer or from other environmental, whether that be wildlife, things like that. Human beings, quite frankly, are quite sterile in most cases, and that's likely not a concern of your body of water. But we'd be happy to help you facilitate a water quality study pre and post the event to validate that.
You know, and then there was a question if we've considered using Lake Placid opposed to Mirror Lake that could free up the town impact as well as the environmental impact. And one of the things that, you know, did come up in the survey and we did talk about is, you know, what are the adjustments to the race course that we could make that are reasonable? So I would say that's on the table like anything else. I don't think we're in the position to say, oh yeah, that's a good idea, let's do that, but it's on it's certainly all on the table. Let's see. There's a lot going on here already. So let's see. When is the Ruse contract renewal with Essex County, Jim?
I don't have it right in front of me. I think we normally have a 3-year contract. I think we might be in our 2nd year. I'd have to look though, and I don't have it right here.
And then Karen wants to know if we don't host the Ironman anymore, would it go to Burlington? I've heard that they would like one. If people here really didn't want it, do you think Tupper Lake or other Adirondack towns would ever be big enough?
Let's have Dave answer that.
20 plus years of history in Lake Placid matters. Are we shopping the event around? The answer point blank is no. We want to get better we want to become a better partner. Again, consume the information that's been provided from the survey from your leadership and get better so that we can have this conversation in a different way, which is like, how do we get better every year and make this a more successful weekend for you? That's our objective at this point.
Thank you. And then Dave, was this your comment in regard to bed taxes, money from people staying in hotels?
Yeah, there's the question above that was bed tax is actually public tax money, and it's not. The way bed tax works is it's money that you pay as a tourist when you go into another economy, and it's charged at your hotel bill. So it's not money that's levied on your property, for example, or county income tax that you're paying or state income tax that you're paying. It's actually money from other tourists. So I just wanted to clarify that for the individual that was asking those public tax funds money.
Yeah, it still is a county tax though.
It's a county tax, but it's not paid
Related
by the,
to-
is not paid by the residents of Essex County.
Correct.
Okay. I'm gonna get off the tax. I mean, we can go back and forth if we're done. Evan, if you want to give us a call tomorrow, we'll call you. We can go through that as long as you'd like. Let's see, I missed one. Somebody had asked about, had we talked about reaching out to the coaches from the camps about training and how we could work with them? And yes, we have had several conversations about training and the training camps and, you know, how to work better. And, you know, there's also biking is becoming more and more popular. So, you know, we take Ironman off the roads training, doesn't mean the bike issue goes away. It would certainly probably reduce it for, you know, I think we can say that confidentially, but it doesn't mean that it's going to go away. So there's you know, yes, we need to address this on many fronts, right? From sharing the roads to better signage to alternative training loops. And then even talking about, you know, Jim, on a state level, talking about, you know, really working towards bike lanes.
Exactly. I mean, to leverage it to try to get some real bike lanes in would be a good thing.
Let's see, people already stay in Tupper Lake and farther. Lake Placid for swim sounds unreasonable. Most is state or private land. That's Petra. Do you think that we could insist on paying less since our race is so popular? We can get into that. This would be a question for the town, which should really have reps in this conversation. I think we do have town representation. If Ironman gives us so much money, why have we not had property taxes or other taxes reduced? When does it positively have a cause and effect to the locals? So when does it positively have a cause effect to the locals?
Well, not a study that we did, but sort of indirectly, New York State puts out a study done by a group called, I think, Tourism Economics. It's on our website. They identified, I think, in Essex County that if it, let me phrase this properly. If it wasn't for tourism overall in Essex County, to maintain the same level of government services that we have, it would increase tax bill on an average of $3,800. So you can look at that. That's on our Roost State EK site. They've done that across the state for every county. We're one of the higher counties dependent on tourism revenues offsetting other county expenses. I don't know if that answered that, but that's the only information we would have on that, we have on that.
Hey, Michelle, will you grab that on Roost 80K and put it in the chat?
It's at the end of that report where they break down the Adirondack counties.
Good one, Michelle. Man, you're
That was
fast.
quick. Holy
No
Mary.
kidding.
I was already en route.
You know, and then Natch has a comment about, you know, the studies have been done such as Walden Pond and the human urine has a big impact. So that happens during Ironman, but it also happens all summer long at Lake Placid Club, Hotel Beaches, collectively probably far greater than Ironman. It would be interesting to have Kurt do a study on Mirror Lake.
It would be.
Mhm.
I know the Sable River Association certainly watches it.
So in conclusion, the economic impact continues to be the conversation, and what would Lake Placid look like without Ironman? And what would it look like without that training? And what would it look like without the inconveniences? And the training starts in May and goes, you know, right through to the race. And what would it look like not having the inconvenience of the race day? Those are all questions that, you know, we as a community and as a task force have to determine, as with working with a partnership, which it is a partnership. We've been in a relationship with Ironman for 22 years. I mean, that's longer than most people stay married, to be honest.
Hmm.
They usually break up over money too, damn it. So,
Don't get personal.
uh, yeah, so, Ironman has to lean in and we have to, figure out as a community where we want to go. And our reality is that we are a tourism destination. Do we feel the need to balance our community needs with our tourism industry? Absolutely. Do we feel a need that as a community, we need to diversify our economy? Absolutely. We just have to decide if are we throwing the baby out with the bathwater? I don't know if we are or not, but I think the conversation has to continue. But at some point, we have to come together as a community and decide what's best and how to move forward in a way that's going to have, a positive impact long-term, not only for everybody, or for as many people as we can possibly satisfy. Anybody have anything else that they want to say? Evan, we'll call you about the occupancy tax to continue this conversation.
Yeah, we should also call Jim Smith. Do we have their contacts?
I don't have Jim Smith, but Jim, if you want to put it in the chat, we have Evan
Okay.
and Barry and anybody else. When will you choose to renew when will the choice be made if we're going to renew it? We've given a commitment by the end of December, early January.
Well, we're under no pressure to do that. I mean, that's not, Ironman can pressure us for that, but it's going to be up to the task force, how they feel and what the recommendations they're going to make.
But that's true, but we did make
I agree.
a commitment to try and give them an answer so that they can, as a business, if they are going to find another location, give them the opportunity to do that.
Without a doubt. We recognize that.
I just wanted to add, if there's the survey is up on the roost80k.com/research if you would like to review any of the data that we talked about tonight.
Can you put that right in the chat there too, Jason?
I'll put a link. I'll put a link to the research page here. The link is right there. And then if you'd like to review the raw data, it's a giant, file with literal raw data in it. You're welcome to email me. I'll add my email to the chat as well, and I can send you that file.
So we have that live on our page now.
It is. You can go and download it right now if you'd like.
And, just in closing, there's many questions about the cost benefit and again, the economic impact. And the truth of the matter is that we will, again, I can't say it enough because I feel like there's a perception that there's information out there that for some reason we're not sharing. As we put it together, we are sharing it. And I feel that it's important for everybody to understand this is a very, very important topic and something that we really need to pull together to decide, but we also have another program of work. So things might not be pulling together as fast as some people may want, but it's not for lack of trying. It's just for not enough hours in the day as we sit here at 6:45 at night. And many of our teams started at 7:30 or 8 o'clock this morning, and that's not an unusual day. So again, we will keep you posted and we will continue this conversation. And we just ask that you come to the table and be part of the conversation. So everybody that came tonight, thank you very, very much for participating. It's
Yes,
great.
thank you very much. It's been very helpful.
Thank you, everybody. Have a great night.
Bye-bye.
Thank you, Mary. Thank you, Dee Dee, Jim Smith, Evan, and all those others that participated.